So the service has been running for a while now, and actually what it's doing is it's broadcasting Bitcoin transactions in real time and Bitcoin blocks using a compact block format. So basically, it's a digest referring to previous blocks, which takes less bandwidth. So that's the kind of real-time aspect of it. And then it's also doing block retransmits in a 24-hour period, where the previous 24 hours are broadcast 4 or so times per day to cover you if you still having audio problems here. So that's to cover you if you have a power cut or an outage, that you'll just wait for the retransmit and you'll be back online in a few hours. Some months ago, we launched additional coverage over Asia Pacific, so all of Asia, Australia, New Zealand, Pacific Islands, that part of the world. So in total, there are now 4 satellites and 5 coverage zones. So one of the satellites has 2 transponders. There's a combined satellite that's providing service to Asia and the Australia region. And we have 2 uplinks, so redundant uplinks. So what you see on the right is a 30-foot or 9-meter dish, which is the west uplink. So with the satellite, most of the intelligence is on the ground station, and we'll talk about that more in a minute. The picture on the left is Telstar 18V, which was launched sort of September or October last year, and deprecated the previous satellite, so we switched the Asia region over to that after it was launched. That was launched by SpaceX. So what Blockstream is doing is leasing a bandwidth allocation on 4 different satellites and 5 transponders from different providers and covering different regions. So the design of the system is such to keep the equipment cost low for users. So there are different designs you can do, some which lower the kind of space component cost, but increase the consumer cost. So we really try to optimize for consumer cost because we want to get to global coverage and reduce cost of access and make the equipment quite cheap and easy to acquire for users. So you can use a 45-centimeter dish. The picture on the left is a live demo we did during the Understanding Bitcoin conference in Malta last month. And tell during the actual presentation live on stage. And the equipment on the right is showing the kind of minimum CPU footprint that you need. So basically, you use a software-defined radio, which is the device on the right-hand side of the, and this is an ARM64 board, so it's about a $40 computer, multi-core 64-bit ARM processor, and a software-defined radio USB key, which costs about $10 or $15 on eBay, Amazon, Alibaba. There are a few models that work, a range of models that will work. So then the question is, what do you use this for? So it has different appeal to different users. So for people with high-speed bandwidth in the West, you might say, well, I have a high-speed internet. Why do I need the satellite? And the answer is that it provides you with a great deal of privacy. Because if you're connected to the Bitcoin peer-to-peer network, you are advertising your IP address to other nodes on the network. And we know there are taint tracing companies that are putting spiders out into the network and trying to identify all the nodes that are transacting Bitcoin. Node was the first node to send a given transaction, and there may be other people with more nefarious intent analyzing the Bitcoin network. So by using the satellite to receive your full node data, you are, it's completely passive, so nobody knows you're participating in the Bitcoin network. It also saves you bandwidth. Even if you configure Bitcoin in a low bandwidth configuration where you don't relay data, you just receive, it can use up to 10 gigabytes a month, and it can use quite a bit more than that if you start relaying. So we'll save you bandwidth cost. For the emerging market, it makes a big difference because the cost of high-speed internet in many emerging market countries is actually more expensive in dollar terms. And on top of that, their average income, the economy is weaker. So there are whole countries with very few full nodes in it, and it's due to a cost basis. And there are maps online where you can see where people have geolocated Bitcoin full nodes. There are around 100,000 full nodes. I think it's been increasing with the adoption of Lightning and more people running different full node manufacturers' equipment. So it provides more global Bitcoin access, has more people able to fully participate in the network. You get additional security benefits as a user by verifying transactions you receive using a full node. For another aspect of this is for Bitcoin needs to have a kind of single uniform global view of the ledger. And people who work in networking, like in ISPs unrelated to Bitcoin, will know that there are network splits where occasionally there'll be a misconfiguration or a fishing boat will dig up an undersea fiber cable and a country will be disrupted for some hours or half a day. And if that happens to a big country with a lot of mining, you could accept as a final payment a transaction which never happened on the real, on the larger Bitcoin network. So the satellite network provides you with some completely independent types of connectivity that will, give you a second view and fill in. So if there are, if there's somebody inside the country that's continuing to mine, they will learn about the progress outside the country via the satellite link. And interestingly, the satellite networks, the uplinks are looking at the neighboring satellites. So there's redundant power and redundant internet at both of the uplink sites. But if that fails, if the internet connection fails at one of the uplink, it's also receiving a Bitcoin data feed from the neighboring satellite. So it can kind of uplink to one satellite, down to the other teleport or uplink site, and up to the next satellite. So it has kind of cross-satellite redundancy as well. So another kind of network disruption is political disruption. As we saw during the Arab Spring some years ago, one of the first things that happens in a coup or some major political disruption is governments will disrupt or disconnect the internet. And so if Bitcoin is digital gold and a hedge against geopolitical uncertainty, and bear in mind that in a country in this kind of situation, the exchange rate could be in free fall and the economy generally disrupted, such that foreign currency or gold coins or Bitcoin may be your only hedge, that the ability to transact in times of uncertainty is what you're hedging with. So the ability to continue transacting when the internet is switched off, when cell networks are disrupted, is interesting geopolitically. And for the kind of more normal day-to-day use case, many businesses that are strongly dependent on reliability of the Bitcoin network, like people doing merchant services, Bitcoin exchanges, payment processors, and even Bitcoin miners could mine using the satellite. And obviously, if you're mining, you'll lose money very quickly if you have a network outage. And it is the case, actually, that some of the mines are in pretty remote locations because they're just looking for the cheapest power. And sometimes there's no town, there's no telephone lines, So I've definitely heard firsthand stories from, mining farm operators that they have been forced to operate a whole farm on like a GPRS cell phone signal for a week while they try to wait. So something like this, and we've had interest from people doing mining to have a redundant internet access using this. So this is receive only, but when you're mining, you can construct blocks from the received data, and when you've constructed the block, you can publish the counters and the key you want to get paid to in a very compact way. So I would say you could probably publish a block that you found using an SMS message or some other equipment. So more about the user parts. The part on the left is the USB software-defined radio device. So this is a $10 or $15 piece of equipment. You connect it to the satellite dish. The part on the right is recognizable as the piece that goes on the end of the arm that collects the analog signal that's been reflected off of the dish. And it does some frequency. It's actually a powered device, and it does some frequency down conversion. So as I said, there are 4 satellites with least bandwidth. So another thing to understand about satellites is it's a very specialized area, and it's high tech in some ways, but in other ways they design the systems so that the intelligence is on the ground, because they don't want to have to update digital systems on the satellite. So the satellite is largely analog. So what you do is you send the analog encoded signal to the satellite, and it reflects it. And it's not like an evenly broadcast thing. There are hundreds of little antennas pointed at population areas, basically, on the satellites. And so on our uplinks, we have Bitcoin nodes, and they're connected. They try to achieve very low latency in receiving Bitcoin transactions, and they do that using the fiber protocol, which is a protocol that Matt Corallo implemented to give low latency for mining applications, basically. Miners need to get low latency access to blocks, and we wanted to minimize latency, so we use it. Then there's error correction added so that you withstand like transmission noise, multiple retransmits per day to recover from power outages. The software-defined radio device, the small device there, does analog to digital conversion only, and then the signal processing is actually all done in software and a minimum specification is an ARM64 kind of pro version of a Raspberry Pi, basically. So the one I showed is a ROC64. And there are some guides online about people who have set that up using a ROC64. So the other thing we did last year is we have some leftover, like spare capacity bandwidth on the satellite, and we can see that if you're in an area without strong internet connection and you're receiving Bitcoin data, you might want some auxiliary information to help your application. Like you don't know the current price, right? And if you're operating a kiosk on the side of the road of a diesel generator, and you're selling things, you don't know the price, so maybe you need to know the price, or maybe you need to know some application info. And so we opened up the ability for users and programmers and third-party developers to send messages through the satellite. And so there's a web REST API where you can put in small messages and pay using Bitcoin Lightning micropayments. And it's actually a kind of small auction. So there's a queue, and it just sends the item at the top of the queue, and the item at the top of the queue is the item that's currently paying the highest fee per byte. And people have used it for a whole range of different things. So there's the Satoshi challenge at the moment, where people are searching for clues to claim a $1 million Bitcoin prize. And some of the messages around that, some of the clues have been sent through the satellite. There's a guy that started blogging, the post-Soviet blogger, and that's the image on the screen. You can look it up. And somebody started broadcasting a kind of daily news update service. So, it's an open access. Developers can use it for a range of things. So the relatively new thing, so this was only announced a couple of days ago at the Magical Crypto Conference here in New York, is some partnership work we did between GoTenor, that makes these mesh networks, and Blockstream. So you can visit txtenor.com, which is a special site which is just about this kind of combination of technology. So GoTenor is an existing mesh network system. It's a company that makes these devices, and they're pretty interesting. So they provide a kind of ruggedized, battery-powered mesh network. The hop range between the devices is 1 mile, approximately, in an urban area with obstructions, and 3 miles with clear terrain and no obstructions. And it's mesh, right? So the messages get sent hop to hop, and can make their way over greater distances by building up a network of users with these equipment. And it's portable equipment as well, it's battery powered. And so the idea for the satellite is that they've integrated this into the software you run on a satellite node when you're receiving transactions from the Blockstream satellite. And it allows you to send Bitcoin transactions through the mesh network. And they've also, which is pretty cool, implemented relaying of the API messages that arrive. So if there's a news service, it actually gets broadcast out through the mesh network locally. So that's pretty cool. Another question, so the mesh network is going to upload to the internet at some point as it hops through the mesh network. But if it's very remote, the question is, well, who has the internet connection, right? If you're out of range of GPRS data or even SMS gateways, that's another option. There are, unrelated to the Blockstream satellite service, somewhat expensive bidirectional internet services. Both of these devices I show are portable devices. So the one on the top right is an Iridium Go MiFi. So it gives you a Wi-Fi signal, and it gives you bidirectional internet. It's incredibly slow. It's 2400 baud. For people who have been around in computers for a really long time, that's about the speed of the first modem ever manufactured or something like that. Not quite, but it's extremely slow. But the key observation is Bitcoin transactions are small. So the blockchain from Bitcoin may be 10 gigs a day, but an individual transaction is a few hundred bytes. And so even if the cost to send data uplink is $10 a megabyte, it's still going to be a few cents to send a transaction because they're so small. And it would also be slow to send a lot of data through Iridium Go because of the speed. But a transaction, it'll probably take a couple of seconds. So again, that's usable. The Hughes bidirectional is faster. That's a BGAN device. And it does about 384 kilobits. It's about the size of a laptop. You point the back of it at the satellite and tune it a bit. So the mesh networks we just talked about, so they can bridge between these devices. You can share uplink equipment in an area with weak infrastructure or a very remote location. There's also an SMS gateway operated by Pavel Rosnak, who is the CTO of Trezor. So what's coming next? So we're continuing to evolve the technology and improving it. So a bigger retransmit window so that you can survive more types and durations of power outage. Fill the coverage gap. So the coverage covers almost the entire population, but there's a segment around Eastern Europe and Middle East where there are some areas that are not covered. The North and South Pole are not coverable because you can't reach them from geosynchronous satellites, but there are not so many people that live there. We want to lower the equipment cost, make kits so that people can buy the kit. Today, it's a bit of follow the instructions and buy the right parts. So we had a lot of requests from people to buy kits for it, make it easier to use, and see more third-party developers. So already since the weekend with the announcement, there have been people posting information about their success at setting up the Go tenor mesh network and starting to build out that infrastructure. So that's it. Thank you very much.